Dean, virtually all of the religious traditions have within them, in addition to God, other spirit beings like angels, demons. Sometimes they have different hierarchies and ranks and all sorts of orders of things. From an ESP point of view, and looking at a lot of anecdotal phenomena that people report seeing angels and being demon-possessed and all of this, how have you analyzed that data?
I view it as a projection of the unconscious. So you don't need to go too far into the ESP world to think about why people persist in believing in such things. Because our unconscious projects all kinds of interesting things out there. But if you did take a step into the ESP world, and you can say, well, if there is some kind of intersubjective reality, a reality that we create between ourselves by sharing thoughts, sharing feelings, whatever, then you can imagine that a world where everybody was actually pretty compassionate and kind to each other and so on, but there's a very deep part of us as well, the part which is self-defeating, the part which smokes and drinks when we know we shouldn't smoke and drink. And the example I always have, which is I will sometimes find myself reaching for a cookie, knowing that I shouldn't eat the cookie, and yet my hand keeps going for the cookie. Look, it's picking up the cookie. Oh my God, it's coming back, and I'm eating the cookie suddenly. Well, where did that come from? I'm consciously actually not wanting to do this, but I'm sort of amazed at the idea that there's an unconscious part of me which can override this thin veneer of conscious awareness. So what happens then if there's some deep, dark part of ourselves, the shadow side, as psychotherapists might say, that begins to project out into a shared world?
Let me see if I understand this, because people who see guardian angels or people who are so-called demon-possessed and have to be exorcised in some religious traditions or whatever, you would say those are not just psychological phenomena that they have themselves, either hallucinating or having a psychological repression that causes the illusion of a demonic thing. So you believe there could be, in some of those cases, something more than just a psychological process?
It's a natural extension of the idea that you're not locked inside your head. And then the moment you make the leap of faith, or maybe the leap of evidence, that our intentions affect the world around us and affect what other people think to some degree, then it's not that you literally can project or like a solid independent entity out there that somebody might call a demon, but on the other hand, you might create a shared mental space in which it seems very real. It'll seem just as real as a hard table would seem, but it's different in type.
There is a huge difference between the psychological manifestation from an unconscious to some physical expression of it that we would have. If I have some deep problem from my childhood, and Freud did this, and I have a psychological trauma, I might have a paralysis in my hand, but that's caused by some deep psychological trauma. Mm-hmm. That's one kind of projection. And in some ages, that might have seemed like demon possession. But then maybe through psychotherapy or something else, I get rid of that problem and I'm normal again. So that's one kind. But you're saying something more than this.
Yeah. Let's take, for example, the issue of haunting and ghosts, okay, as a kind of independent entity.
Right. There's a lot of anecdotal data on
Tons of data. So the basic concept is for ones where you can sort of get rid of the psychological explanations. People go to a place and they experience weird things. And sometimes they actually will see a character of some type. Well, where did that come from? Assuming that the reports are real. And there are plenty of credible reports like this. I've even done a few expeditions myself to castles in Scandinavia that have long histories of these things.
Did you see anything?
I did, yes. And I don't usually see things like this, but I saw strange lights, but precisely in the place where people reported seeing a ghost. I didn't see a ghost, I just saw a light. So you then think, well, where did it come from? Perhaps for hundreds of years, people were paying attention to an event that happened in a particular place over a long period of time. The question raises as to whether or not all of that intention, that focused intention, because remember, this is life and death stuff that they're paying attention to, maybe it changed something about the physical substrate itself. And so when somebody new comes along in that vicinity, maybe they resonate in some way with all of these intentions going back into the past.
You say physical stuff. Is it really changing the manifestation of what we call the physical world, or is it some window into an ethereal world?
Well, in the psi biz, we say that it's a place memory. It's a physical change. We think of it more in terms of an informational change. Right. So at an informational level, the physical substrate, like the granite wall of a castle, for example, physically changes in some way, and it stores information. And so when somebody comes in the vicinity of that information, they pick it up. Now, of course, for somebody who's coming into a place without any knowledge at all is really the only way you can test it to see if this is true. Mm-hmm. But there have been enough cases in the haunting literature that suggests that very long-term haunts of a particular type, like a particular look of somebody, is reported by people who were not aware previously that there was in fact a haunt there.
And this would be the result of this combined intersubjectivity power.
That's one way of thinking of it, yeah.
Is there another way to think of it?
Well, that seems to be the most likely reason that, from my perspective, but I'm thinking more or less from a physicalist science perspective.
Right.
The alternative is that there really is something there.
Yeah.
You know, so from a spiritual perspective, you might think that there is actually some kind of actual entity which has gotten stuck there.
Yeah. So, and that's the more traditional view. It's certainly not the materialist view, but it's the view of people who believe in sometimes they call it an intermediary range between the physical world and the spiritual world, and these creatures get caught there or something. And certainly angels and demons are populate all of the major religions, mm-hmm. and have a very theological explanation. Mm-hmm. And your approach is quite different than all of that.
Well, it's partially because I come at these questions more from a scientific perspective, and I'm not very religious by nature. Mm-hmm. So the reason I have a problem with actual independent entities that are sort of quasi between here and there is because you have to start multiplying worlds very quickly. You have multiple levels, it just explodes, and actually in the same way that the multiple worlds hypothesis explodes. So just from the point of view of parsimony, I'd rather stick with something like a physical world where unusual informational effects can occur as a result of lots of concentration of mind.
And could this explain other phenomena that people are curious about? Take UFOs as an example.
UFOs would be an example of a type of ghost. It's a ghost in the sky. Now, of course, the difference is that while the sky is a physical thing, it's a lot more mercurial than a rock. So it's not clear what would hold the information, yeah. But on the other hand, maybe it's something that is projected. It's a projection from the collective unconscious. It may not be an accident, for example, that most of the UFO sightings have occurred around secret military bases. Of course, when they're secret, we don't know that yet, but historically we find out that there are clusters around these military bases. So the easy explanation is that people are seeing experimental aircraft. Except when you look in the historical record, oftentimes the people who should know that it was experimental aircraft don't know. Now these are not what they're telling us, but from Freedom of Information Act previously classified documents. They didn't know either. So it raises the possibility that very large anxiety, for example, about nuclear weapons and other secret weird things happening at bases just takes the collective unconscious and kind of projects the anxiety into the air. And that's what people see.
This is a radical interpretation of aspects of our world that really kind of differs from every current one. It certainly differs from the normal materialists and from all of the natural religious points of view. You inhabit your own kind of world.
I think we all inhabit our own little worlds, yes. What I'm suggesting here is not so unusual, actually. There is a line of thought that says that if there is something like a collective unconscious, then that should have aspects of telepathy, it might have aspects of psychokinesis, it would have in a large way what we experience in a small way as ESP. Well, what is really large ESP going to look like? Angels, aliens, and demons.